Hello, and welcome to the Conversation with Asian and Pacific Islander in the Planning Field webinar. The Asian and Pacific Islander Interest Group is proud to sponsor this four-part webinar series. I'm Hing Wong, Chair of the Asian and Pacific Islander Interest Group. For today's session, we have four esteemed public sector planners at various stages of their careers. We are still looking for speakers for the other three webinars, so if you're interested, please contact us. 1.5 CM credits are available for today's webinar. If you're not yet a member of our interest group, please join by filling out the survey on our APA website, and it's completely free. Todd Van Adelack, our Programs Director, will host today's panel. Todd?
Great, thanks, Hing. Hi, everyone. I'm Todd Van Adelack, as Hing said. I'm the Programs Director for our interest group, and I'm also a planning consultant based in Chicago. I will be serving as today's moderator for the panel. And I wanted to thank you all for taking the time, typically in a very busy month, heading into the holiday season. So I know it's a very hectic, so we appreciate you taking the time to join us for part one of our four-part series on conversations with Asians and Pacific Islanders in the planning field. We are all at different points of our planning career trajectory, whether you're an early career planner, a mid-level planner, or a seasoned veteran. And we actually have a mix of all of that in our panel today. While we were able to learn a lot from any of our colleagues across the industry, there's something about learning from others who look like us or who look like you and have similar experiences as you as an Asian or a Pacific Islander. We're excited to share today's slate of panelists from the public sector as part one. And then at the end of the Q&A, at the very end of our time today, we'll share more information about parts 2, 3, and 4, which will be in 2023. I will introduce each panelist separately before they provide their opening remarks and some slides. Some have slides, some don't, so some will be similar tech. But a friendly reminder is to share any questions you might have in the chat box here on Zoom, and we will go through any comments shared at the Q&A after all four panelists have finished their remarks. So the first panelist will be Joyce. I'm going to give Joyce hosting capabilities so that she may share her screen. So as Joyce gets set up, I will just give a quick bio about Joyce. So Joyce Pan Huang serves as the director for the City of Cleveland City Planning Commission under Mayor Justin M. Bibb. In this capacity, Huang facilitates the development of the city's long-range comprehensive plan, community-based neighborhood planning efforts, urban design and architectural review, and regulatory practices. She previously served as a vice president of community development at Midtown Cleveland, Inc., an economic and community development organization for the city's Midtown and Asiatown neighborhoods. A transplant from the Rochester, New York area, Joyce has lived in the Cleveland area for 15 years, including the Shaker Square, Ohio City, and Asiatown neighborhoods. As a second-generation Asian American, she fully embraces her bicultural identity, which has also shaped how she views city planning. However, Huang loves playground hunting with her 3-year-old daughter and husband, and she appreciates public art and well-designed and active public plazas and parks. Joyce holds a Master's of Urban Planning, Design, and Development from Cleveland State University's Levin College of Urban Affairs and a BS in Sociology with a minor in the program in the environment from the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. So I will give it to Joyce.
Great, thank you very much, Todd. And it's my pleasure to be on this panel with such distinguished guests, and it's great to meet all of you as well virtually. And it's just a huge honor to be able to be here and be in a space with other Asian Americans. I can just briefly share that it's been about 8 months into my current appointment under the Honorable Mayor Justin Bibb. It's been quite an adventure since I started in the public sector and previously had been mostly involved in nonprofit work. You know, the election of the mayor, Mayor Bibb last year was a huge shift in the city of Cleveland. Previously, the leadership had been there for 16 years. You know, city planning, while always a progressive department, I think, you know, was looking for shift. And so I'm honored to take that position. I will add that there have, I think, only been 2 Asian Americans in the city's history of leadership, including a former director of community development. So I am the second one. And I'm also a mom, and I have a 3-year-old. So I'm the first woman and the first mom to be in this position as the director of city planning. And I really believe that if we plan for women and we plan for children, that we're planning for everybody, and we're mindful of more people. So really quickly on the screen, just wanted to show you where Cleveland is in relationship to everything. For those who are not from the Midwest, we sit on the Great Lakes. It's a really amazing place to be. The Great Lakes has the world's 25% of the world's fresh water. And so as we go into a period where we're experiencing a lot more climate change and a lot more issues with regard to, climate refugees, we're really trying to be mindful of our environment as well as our location here along the Great Lakes. And we are a border town. We border Canada. And so we really consider ourselves part of the North Coast in the US. In my bio, I talked a lot about these special places, and I think as planners, can't help but be place-based and look at maps and think about the places that we love. So I did grow up in Rochester, New York, also around the Great Lakes, Lake Erie, went to school in Ann Arbor, Michigan, at the University of Michigan, and then moved to Cleveland. And these are just some images to give you a sense of the place where I've lived. And I am a 2nd-generation Taiwanese American. So both of my parents are from Taiwan. Most of our family actually still is in Taiwan. So we consistently visit, and I'm often inspired by the metropolitan environment, as well as just the blend of modern and historic, as well as the walkability and the mix of modalities that I think we wish we had here in the United States, or at least more of. And I think one of the things that I try to remind myself in all of this is a Japanese form of pottery. And the philosophy that I hope to bring into my service as a public servant in planning is to really be thinking about how we can bring healing to our communities that have been divided. Like many American cities, the city of Cleveland is very racially segregated. It is among one of the poorest major cities in America. The difference between downtown and a neighboring area called the Central Neighborhood, there's a 5x difference in the average median income. And the average median income in the Central Neighborhood is $10,000 per person. So it's quite a disparity with regard to how neighborhoods have been just completely segregated, even block by block. You can tell the difference. And so this is an image that inspires me from like an East Asian culture that talks about how when this is a form where like you take a piece of pottery that has become broken into many pieces and you put it back together using gold to stitch the pottery together. And this represents that the piece of pottery no longer exists as what it used to, but now is this completely remade and new version of itself that is better and perhaps a different evolution of the prior piece of pottery. And so for me, I know this is kind of high level and philosophical. I think the idea is, as a planner working for the city, how can we stitch together and heal our neighborhoods and heal our communities by bringing them together, making better access, breaking down infrastructure that divides our communities, and create the built environment that really will promote much more community healing. So really broadly speaking, that's my philosophy. But if we're talking nuts and bolts, this is what we administer at the city. We have boards and commissions, Planning Commission, Landsparks Commission, Board of Zoning Appeals. And not only do we regulate, but we're really the keepers of the vision of the city and we curate what goes on in our city. And we also promote really good ideas that help provide that kind of equitable and community healing that we see. So there's a lot of major projects and initiatives. We have a very young, ambitious mayor, and so he has given us a lot of authority and go ahead to say, all right, you need to keep pushing forward these very progressive actions in the city. So most recently, we passed our Complete and Green Streets Ordinance update, which requires much more multimodal and transportation. So protected bike lanes, and trying to set goals around how many miles we want to see have protected bike lanes, and various other amenities. We are really heavy into lakefront planning as well as riverfront planning. And so that is a huge initiative that I'm really excited to be a part of. We recently released a request for proposals for the North Coast Lakefront Master Plan. And so we will be taking, starting a contract with a consultant team soon to really reimagine our lakefront on the North Coast. We also finished a plan last year around the vision for the valley, which is around our riverfront and how we might activate much more of that riverfront, which traditionally has been a very industrial riverfront. It is one of our federal highways. We have about $4 billion worth of maritime economy. And so I think that's one of the interesting things is how do we balance these huge ships with what is transitioning space into more recreational and residential. We're also, this is the picture of the lakefront, which has some significant infrastructure barriers. So we're undergoing studies right now to bridge the downtown area to the lakefront, as well as taking advantage of the bipartisan infrastructure discretionary grants. You may be familiar that President Biden, through Congress, has put forth a ton of infrastructure money, including Reconnecting Communities federal grant opportunity, which is really taking a look at all of the heavy infrastructure that has divided communities. And so this is the downtown area, and this is the central neighborhood that I spoke of earlier. Again, this is a community that has an average median income of $10,000, which is 5 times less than of the average median income of downtown Cleveland. And what we're doing is we want to study areas where we can actually cap the highway and totally reframe what a 21st or even 22nd century highway looks like, and how we might be able to rebuild connections between communities. We're also doing a ton of transit-oriented development work in Cleveland, looking at how to amplify our high-frequency transit, as well as form-based zoning. So with that, I think the last thing I want to share before others take the helm is, I think for me as an Asian American, growing up in the Midwest, I've always had to really negotiate my identity. A lot of it has been a journey with regard to really grasping and being confident in my identity as an Asian American person, particularly since I've always lived in spaces where there's probably less than 6% Asian Americans. And the city right now is a majority minority city with a little over half are African American, and a pretty large Hispanic, Latino, Latinx community. And the Asian American community is very small. And so it has been really interesting to be in, Black spaces a lot, and really trying to work with the narrative around racial equity while also sort of navigating my own racial identity and racial journey with regard to that, and working with the different perceptions that people may have of me. And so I'm open to discussing more of that, should that be a topic that you're interested in, as well as any of the, planning efforts or technical things that you see here. So with that, I just want to say thanks and turn it back over to you, Todd.
Great, thank you, Joyce. I am going to reclaim host, and our next speaker will be Shannon Tokumaru. I'm going to make Shannon the host so she may share her slides, but I will give her a brief introduction for Shannon as she gets set up. So Shannon Tokomaru is a transportation planner for the city of Alexandria, Virginia. Shannon previously served as a curbside operations analyst for the District Department of Transportation in Washington, D.C. Sorry for this. I just gotta make sure that I switched to Shannon. I think I did. Yes, I did. So Shannon has a BA in communications from Mississippi State University and a master's degree in sustainable urban planning from the George Washington University. Shannon's professional goals focus on creating accessible, efficient, and diverse opportunities for transportation, including incorporation of intelligent technologies with urban planning practices to support equitable and sustainable communities. I will turn it over to Shannon.
Hi, sorry. Currently, I accidentally exited out my slides rather than sharing
Oh, okay.
them.
No worries.
So, just a moment. Sorry, figuring everything out. Okay. Okay. Hi, my name is Shannon Tokomaru, and I am currently a transportation planner at the city of Alexandria. I'm a young planner, so I've been working for about a year now in my current position. And I graduated grad school in August of 2021. But just a little bit of background about me. I grew up in Orlando, Florida, or just outside of Orlando, Florida. And I'm half Japanese. My dad is from Honolulu originally, and I still have family over there. I think it's kind of an interesting thing growing up in Orlando. I feel like much like Joyce being from the South and then also going to school in even more the South in Mississippi. I didn't really see that much diversity. It kind of just became something to me that was like ingrained in my brain. Like I feel like even growing up, it was something I didn't even really think about. Even my family in Florida also didn't look like me. So it wasn't something, I feel like the Asian part of my life and like the Japanese part of my life, and then also like the cultural Hawaiian part wasn't something that I was exposed to that often. So it's kind of interesting now being in a more diverse area. And then just getting older and embracing that side of me that I feel like I never really like got to attach to when I was younger. But now it's something that I feel like I missed out on in my youth. So a little bit of my education background. I went to school at Mississippi State University, got a bachelor's in communication to get into how I came into urban planning. That was a little bit of a more interesting story. I always liked adjacent fields kind of to planning. I did interior design in high school, and I thought that that was what I was going to college for. But I did feel like really pigeonholed in something like that. So I went through urban planning, interior design, landscape architecture, graphic design, only to figure out I wanted to do something really broad. Then I graduated college and I didn't want to do something really broad. So, and my grades weren't that great. So I went to Florida State and I took a couple of classes in public administration and in urban planning. And I just really liked the hands-on aspect of planning. I really loved community engagement. And that was one of the classes that I took. That probably is still one of my favorite aspects of planning and being able to work in the public sector. But when I started applying to grad schools, I attended GW and got a master's in sustainable urban planning. And during that time, I had the opportunity to work at DDOT as a curbside analyst. And that's kind of what put me into transportation. And it just became a field that I really fell in love with and saw a lot of opportunity with. So when I started applying for jobs, I got a position as the transportation development reviewer for the city of Alexandria. And to get a little bit more into that, I'll just start with some background on the city. I currently live in Washington, D.C. I work in Alexandria. It's pretty close by. Sorry, one second. Sorry, I'm trying to pull up my notes. I'm sorry. Oops. Okay. But Alexandria is situated just south of Washington, D.C., and it's bordered to the west and to the south by Fairfax County, Virginia. It is bordered also by Arlington County, Virginia. So it's a pretty diverse area. It's in the DC metro area. And then I've also included a map of Alexandria. This is sort of how we, I guess, break up our small area plans. And these are just the different neighborhoods of the city. Just some high-level demographics. It is mostly a white community. Then the next greatest population is Black or African American, with about 18% Hispanic and Latino, and then 7% Asian or Pacific Islander. I think also in contrast to Cleveland, the median household income in Alexandria is of about $102,000. So it's a pretty wealthy area, definitely considering most of the United States. And I think the US median household income is about $69,000. So, and then some background on things that help inform my personal job. We have the Alexandria Mobility Plan, the Complete Streets Design Guidelines, Dockless Mobility, our transit investment, rapid transit. We are part of the Vision Zero initiative, as well as implementing smart mobility and intelligent transportation systems in our new transit deployments. So this is part of our transit network. We have our city transit company is called Dash. And recently, just about a year ago, they implemented a new network to provide greater connectivity to the city. And kind of part of that network is also, I think you can see in the upper northern side of the city, northeast side, is the Potomac Yard Metro, and that was anticipated to open up this year. There are a few delays, but that's a new metro stop coming in to the city. So really excited about our new transit networks, and the primary focus is on accessibility. And then we're also implementing the bus and rapid transit improvements. So we have 3 primary transit corridors. These are all in their preliminary stages. But we have the West End Transitway, which is represented by the red line, and that in the city is primarily a more suburban area. A big focus is connectivity over there and also getting transit into this area. So also we have the Duke Street Transitway. We have some developments coming in over there. Right now going to council actually this weekend. There's a 100% affordable housing development that's going in for approval. So really excited about that. And that's a project that I've also been working on, and sort of how that can correlate with our Duke Street Transitway in the future while we're working out new streetscape designs and cross sections for that. So a little bit on the development review. So I'm the transportation development reviewer, but we also have our planning and zoning department where the urban planners kind of act as the project manager for the submissions, and they coordinate with other departments. As the transportation planner, I am support to that urban planning staff, and I coordinate between all of our transportation departments. And that would include traffic engineering, our Dash transit company, as well as mobility services, and also our transportation demand management managers, and our complete streets managers. So I kind of also just added in the development review timeline, pretty much just how developments are processed through our city. And I make sure that they are consistent with our master plan and the zoning ordinance, as well as all of our transportation policies, which are things like our mobility plan, and then our BRT initiative and the Safe Routes to School and Vision Zero. So I make sure that it's consistent with the city goals of quality building, urban design, and site planning, and that it provides public benefit, and that it's also been responsive to our community input. I also, outside of city staff, I work with the developers and applicants, as well as land use attorneys, just to meet these goals and the guidelines. And then in this, I'm also the primary transportation representative at Planning Commission and City Council. So I sit on our public hearings and respond to any transportation concerns, and make sure that everything is a meet city ordinance. And I think that's all from me. Thank you for letting me join in. I'm really excited to hear from other planners, especially API planners who are a lot more seasoned in urban planning. And it's been great to join. Thank you for having me.
Great, thank you, Shannon. So next on our slate is Joseph Imamura. So I will give Joe hosting, and I will introduce him as he gets set up for his slides. So Joe is the special delegate for the architect of the Capitol. He represents the agency and the architect on various planning boards and commissions. His experience spans 15 years across federal governments with agencies in both the executive and legislative branch. Prior to his work with the architect of the Capitol, Joe was the chief architect in New York for the U.S. General Services Administration. And before that, the Department of Veterans Affairs, where he worked closely with state officials and tribal governments to establish new state and tribal veteran cemeteries across the U.S. Joe is a certified planner as well as a licensed architect and landscape architect, and holds other credentials as a lead accredited professional, project management professional, and certified construction manager. He earned a Bachelor of Science in Environmental Design from Texas Tech University and pursued graduate degrees in architecture, landscape architecture, and urban planning, followed by his doctorate in land use planning and design. In addition to being a professional student and public practitioner, Joe is an impassioned advocate for student learning. He's taught courses in sustainability and design at Texas Tech and George Mason University. And through various industry organizations, he mentors emerging professionals pursuing careers in planning, design, and engineering. So it's perfect that he's here. So I will give it to Joe.
Great, thank you, Todd. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Terrific. I appreciate the opportunity to be here and provide a unique perspective through the lens of federal practice. I want to thank Joyce and Shannon for their story, and we'll try to make some connections with my own story. Particularly, I think Joyce had mentioned the bipartisan infrastructure law, so I'll try to touch on that a bit, and appreciate the fact that she touched a little bit about people's unconscious bias. So I appreciate that, and welcome those additional questions about that, and Shannon's personal story and her identity struggle, because I too am half Japanese. My father's from Tokyo and came to the States for graduate school at Texas Tech University. So that's why I ended up where I did for school. And my grandfather on my mother's side is actually from Russia and grew up in the Ukraine region and migrated to New York when he was a child. So it was only until sort of my adulthood that I really gained an appreciation and valued my heritage as an Asian American. Shannon, you also touched on community engagement and obviously in the city of Alexandria. So I have a project that I did in Alexandria. So hopefully I'll remember to mention that. I hope I don't bore any of you, but if I do, please stick around because Hanson's story is equally compelling and interesting. So I'll try to flip through these slides rather quickly, but welcome any questions afterwards. So here, through the lens of federal government, we've learned a little bit about city government. We don't want to discount county, state, and those maybe that are in international practice too, as in the public sector as public practitioners. So 40,000 planners nationwide, that comes from the 2022 report by APA. Now, these numbers are things that I've kind of collected along the way, so they're definitely not scientific, but they did come from some authoritative source. I just wasn't smart enough to write it down 15 years ago. But over time, the planning profession has grown. So greater than 80% of planners are actually in public practice. And that's broken down into municipal government here. It's about 70%. And then state about a little more than 10%, and federal government, it's actually less than 2%. And if you look at that, we go back to sort of our social studies lessons in the 3 branches of government. So you have less than 1,000 planners that are distributed across all 3 branches of government. Tonight or this afternoon, I can share a little bit about my experience in 2 of the 3 branches. The judiciary seems to be my hanging chad, if you will. I haven't been able to snag that one yet, but the executive branch and the legislative branch. Now, in the executive branch, the U.S. General Services Administration, GSA, and I will try to keep the acronyms to a minimum. That's one thing that federal practitioners are really good at, is with the acronyms. But so GSA is actually the nation's largest landlord and real estate organization. Overall, here it says GSA builds buildings and relationships and communities, and that's true. And it touches on planning policy and physical planning. And all these pretty little images that you see on the right there are federal buildings, U.S. courthouses, and land ports of entry, are otherwise known as border stations. So both on the north and the south. Now, of all those properties, there are about 1,500 federally owned buildings and 8,000 leased buildings. There's actually about over 400 federal agencies. And so you can imagine we can't fit all 400 federal agencies across the country into owned buildings. And so we lease commercial space, and those exist in over 2,000 communities across the country. And just for size and scale, it's about a little under 400 million square feet of federal office space. You can see there, it's a little small image, but it talks a little bit about the Public Buildings Cooperative Use Act, a number of other amendments and executive orders that influence and shape planning policy at the federal level. The images you see on the right there, the red dots, right? Those are the leased buildings, blue dots, the owned buildings. This is from the Multi-Asset Planning, MAP, tool, another acronym there that we developed. This was about 10 or 15 years ago, where GIS was really coming to the forefront, and we were trying to figure out how can we make more informed and better real estate decisions. And so that's when we developed the smart location calculator, so heat maps and the like, and looking at various factors like walkability. So many of you are probably familiar with WalkScore. So it's looking at those kinds of factors and how can we better align our federal footprint to be more sustainable. So example here, this is kind of a busy image here, but Executive Order 13514. It's really entitled Federal Leadership in Environmental, Energy, and Economic Performance. The short of it is that created some space for federal agencies to work with communities. And so I was part of a program to develop an initiative called the Planning Outreach and Partnership Meetings, POP meetings, real quick meetings for federal government to sit down with local stakeholders to figure out ways that we could align our federal projects with local community goals. You can see here on the image on the right, this is just an example in Providence, Rhode Island. So real quick, GSA had a lease space for the SSA and the IRS, and it was expiring. This was shortly after the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, and so which GSA was sort of another infrastructure bill, and we had developed a lot of photovoltaics or solar panels that we installed on several federal buildings. Now, why that's important is because the city of Rhode Island received a grant from HUD and DOT to install solar panels on top of their bus transit center, but they didn't have any expertise in that. They also received a grant from NEA to do some programming in Kennedy Plaza there. And there's a US courthouse and a federal building nearby. And the judge in the US courthouse was really proud of this historic building and really wanted to do tours of his courthouse. And so we knew that there was also a preservation group nearby that was giving tours of the area. And so we also knew that the city of Providence also needed to purchase computers. And so we called this a spider diagram. In essence, it's just about connecting people with different federal agencies, different local agencies and stakeholders to leverage local planning goals and needs. And so this is what we did across 22 city engagements across the country in the first year. And then we did another 12 the following year. And so to date, the program still carries on well after I have left GSA. So that's one aspect of the planning policy. Now here's an image of Newark, New Jersey. So I was the regional chief architect in New York and New Jersey, and covered Puerto Rico and the US Virgin Islands. And here we had a federal campus adjacent to sort of a civic campus of public buildings. It's the Lautenberg Post Office, a historic building, and the MLK building. And you can see here in the image on the right, we have some public green space, but it's bifurcated by Walnut Street, which is actually owned by the city. And so short of that is that, you know, this was a campus that kind of suffered from neglect and just didn't have a lot of money that was put into it, just because it didn't rise to the level of federal funding. So I thought, all right, well, what can we do to sort of set a new vision? And I partnered with the New Jersey Institute of Technology and the city of Newark, and we created a design studio with about 13 students to kind of look at this space, think of creative ideas to reactivate it and improve the public realm. And so they looked at this through a number of site analyses and through the lens of equity, inclusion, accessibility, and developed some ideas on how to improve the public realm in this civic space. And so this generated what they called the City Beautiful Movement Redux for GSA. And so that started a series of projects that applied for federal funding like this on a small scale to improve the public realm across the country. So that's another aspect of sort of the physical planning of GSA. And I guess real quick to GSA, they are also part of the bipartisan infrastructure law bill, as it's known as, for the border stations, the land ports of entry, and looking at how to improve communities along the borders, north and south, through the development and expansion of federal borders. So here we're taking a look at the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. And this is where I guess it ties back to Shannon. My first project there was Alexandria National Cemetery. We all are familiar with maybe the images of Arlington National Cemetery and Tomb of the Unknown Soldiers. So there are national cemeteries across the country in 48 states, as well as state and tribal veterans cemeteries. And so the VA has handed out almost $1 billion in federal grants to states and tribes to establish their own veteran cemeteries. And so here it says supporting, underserved and disenfranchised communities. And there's another acronym there, SDVOSB. That's Service Disabled Veteran-Owned Small Businesses, where all these contracts go to small companies to help establish these national cemeteries or state and tribal cemeteries. And again, the first project I had was actually the rehabilitation of Alexandria National Cemetery. That was one of 14 the first national cemeteries established by President Lincoln. So now from there, the Department of Veterans Affairs, oh, here is an image of the Mitaki Oyasin and All My Relations, All Nations Veterans Cemetery. This is out in Standing Rock, Sioux tribe, so it straddles North Dakota and South Dakota, and it's in the shape of a bison head. Bison obviously being a significant symbol for that particular tribe. And there was an image, I guess this was one of the things, Todd, I grouped all my images together and one stood behind it, but at the entrance of it is actually 3 poles that form a teepee. And those 3 poles represent the Lakota, Nakota, and Dakota tribes. And this is really where I learned that this was a project that received about a $4 million grant. It was a little underfunded. They were a little upset about it. The community was. They needed some more money, didn't want to value engineer any of the design aspects of this. And so I developed sort of this rapport with their veteran service officer over just our backgrounds. And that was the moment I realized that it wasn't a matter of that I was actually an employee of the Department of Veterans Affairs, but really I was an ambassador of goodwill for the United States to a foreign government. And so that was kind of eye-opening for me. All right, we move to the legislative branch. And so if you keep your eye on the dome there, we'll talk a little bit about planning policy and physical planning. So this is an image that I took from my phone. I had this second go around that I'm with the agency. It's a beautiful fall setting at the Bartholdi Park, which is part of the U.S. Botanic Garden. And Todd, I'm running up on my time, but I've got 2 more minutes here. I'll wrap it up.
You're totally fine. We're really good on time, so you're fine.
Excellent. So I am, as Todd mentioned, the special delegate of the architect of the Capitol. So what does that mean exactly? The architect is actually a presidential appointee by the President of the United States. And that person actually, by law, is appointed to the DC Zoning Commission, the Board of Zoning Adjustment, as well as a number of other boards and commissions, namely the National Capital Memorial Advisory Commission, which is another one that I sit on. Now, the extension that we reached to the international practice is the International Network of Parliamentary Properties. And so the architect of the Capitol, AOC, is part of this international network of other government agencies that are charged with historic properties and similar to the Capitol. And so everything that I do for the architect touches everything from the human scale to the urban scale. Now here's some fun party facts that if you're at a dinner party, you can share some of these. So on Capitol Hill, that's about 18.5 million square feet of federal office space. And so there's about 30,000 occupants per day. The Capitol pre-pandemic receives about 3 million visitors per year. So there's about 36 buildings. Not all senators and congressmen are actually housed in the Capitol. We'll have an image of that here in a minute. So Capitol Hill, for the images that you probably recognize online and maybe you've been there, it's 58 acres, almost 900 trees on campus, and over 100 variety of plants, and that's why it's been established as an official arboretum. There are actually 6 campuses to AOC that are spread out throughout the DMV, is what we call it, DC, Virginia, and Maryland. You can see there, Blue Plains, Culpeper, Virginia is really fascinating. So the Library of Congress actually has a storage facility out there where they do all their conservation work for film and audio. It's a phenomenal facility out there. And of course, the Library of Congress, as you can imagine, has a number of storage facilities needed to house their entire repository. All right, so there's several images here. So I want to draw your attention to the screen. There's about 5 of them. So we think of the Capitol as sort of this unchanging campus, but over time we know that it's grown from one side of the Capitol to the other. And over time, it's kind of neat to see the campus grow. And then what will it look like in year 2100? So we're working on Vision 2100 as sort of our long-term master plan for the entire campus. This is what it looks like if we saw a rendering of it. You're looking west from the Capitol there down to the Washington Monument and the Lincoln Memorial. To the left there is the House office buildings. That's where all your members of Congress are, for the House of Representatives. To the right there are the Senate office buildings, Capitol grounds, Supreme Court. We take care of the Supreme Court property, as well as U.S. Botanic Garden, the Library of Congress. This is the U.S. Capitol grounds itself. And then, of course, the Capitol Power Plant takes care of all the heating and cooling and water for the entire campus. So it's sort of self-sustaining and self-operating. Now, from here, we'll take a look at a couple maps. So my role on the Board of Zoning Adjustment and Zoning Commission. So the image on the left is our gateway map. Really, if you think about it, the Capitol is really the center of the city. And so that's why by law, the Capitol or the architect of the Capitol was placed on these boards and commissions. The Zoning Commission or the Zoning Commission was established in 1920. So we've really been shaping the city for over 100 years. So again, from the human scale to the urban scale, here you see from the neighborhood scale to the urban scale. Some of the things that we're struggling with on the city level here is affordable housing and racial equity. So there are about 700,000 residents in DC. We know that that's going to grow over the next 20 years to about 1 million residents. The mayor has set a new goal for 36,000 new units by 2025. And of those 36,000, we want 1/3 of that to be affordable units. And so we're developing a racial equity tool right now and trying to increase our community engagement and targeted outreach in those areas that need affordable housing most. So this is where planning policy really touches physical planning, because it's also a little bit about urban design as well. All right, so that brings us to the National Capital Memorial Advisory Commission. It's a mouthful, but it's an interagency commission that was established by Congress, and its primary role is to recommend particular sites or perform design reviews for commemorative works that are proposed either along the National Mall or in the Washington, D.C. region. The 2 images on the left you might have seen in your textbooks, right? The L'Enfant Plan in 1791, and of course the Macmillan Plan. And you can see what the great cross axis there. And so Congress in 1986, in their infinite wisdom, established this as the great cross axis. Right, it extends from the Capitol to the Lincoln Memorial, from the White House to the Jefferson. And so they viewed this as a complete work of art, in that no commemorative work, be it a memorial, a monument, or even a museum, shall be located here. But Congress can certainly change their mind, and they have. So just recently, if you take a look at the 4 yellow stars, those are proposed locations for the global war on terrorism. So just a couple weeks ago, I was in a hearing on where those might be located. What is the most appropriate location for that? Would it be along the tidal basin there? And the tidal basin is surrounded by the memorial for Martin Luther King, Thomas Jefferson, right? And the Franklin Delano Roosevelt. So maybe the global war on terrorism memorial might not be an appropriate location there. So we look at other factors too, and other locations where it might be appropriate. Now there's 4 blue stars. Now those 4 blue stars represent locations that were proposed by the Smithsonian Museum for the 2 new museums that are online, which is the American Latino Museum and American Women's History Museum. And so the blue star at the farthest to the right by the red star was a proposed location on Capitol grounds. So I would suggest, so you can see this is sort of happening on a regional scale, but on the Capitol scale, if you pay close attention to the red star, we'll zoom in on that. You'll notice this is a map of the Capitol grounds again. And so where it says Square 575, that was the location where Smithsonian was considering locating a new museum. They've now since identified 2 locations, which are opposite of the African American Museum of History and Culture, and then opposite of the Holocaust Museum. So not on Capitol grounds, but we do have another museum that's coming down the pike, which is the Asian American Museum. And so again, what's important here is what are these? Yes, Joyce. So excited about that. So what's important here is looking at what memorials, monuments, or commemorative works that are really touching the periphery of Capitol campus, of the Capitol grounds that might impact perimeter security here, right? So we know that the Peace Corps Commemorative Park is nearby, as well as Fallen Journalist Memorial. It's planned right across from the Native American Museum. And then the Emergency Medical Services is also adjacent to our campus. And then, of course, the American Veterans Disabled for Life Memorials are established. So these are, of course, are matters of capital interest. And the memorials, of course, are matters of national interest. So with that, Todd, as they say on the Zoning Commission, I go back, give the rest of my time to Hanson and his story. So thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Joe. That was really informative. And it actually reminded me, your very first slide reminded me that actually was for a very short time. I was actually I wasn't a planner, I was an intern at HUD. And so it was a quick reminder that, oh yeah, I was a federal employee at one time. It was only for 3 months, but good
That's
reminder.
great.
It was a while
Yeah.
ago. But thanks, Joe. So our last speaker will be Hanson Hom. Hanson does not have slides, but he's low tech, but he's high energy. So I will take back hosting so that I can just put up a title slide as Hanson speaks. But just a quick intro on Hanson. He has over 40 years of experience, municipal planning experience, including as a community development director for 18 years. Since retiring as assistant city manager in the city of Sunnyvale in California, he provides management and planning consultant services for cities in the San Francisco Bay Area. He also serves on the City of Alameda Planning Board where he lives. Hanson has been active for many years in the APA California chapter, previously serving as section director and vice president of conferences. He is a member of the Planner Emeritus Network and the California Planning Roundtable, and is on the steering committee of our interest group here. Hanson holds master's degrees in urban and regional planning from San Jose State University and public administration from Cal State University, East Bay. He also has an undergraduate degree in landscape architecture from UC Berkeley. He is also a licensed landscape architect. And I will hand it over to Hanson.
Okay, thank you, Todd. It's great to hear that these interesting stories from all the other panelists. I too actually worked for the federal government one time for the National Park Service. It was actually my very first job while I was still in college. But what I thought I would do, and I'm not sure how high energy I am today, but I'll try to live up to that, that illusion anyway. But, I'm probably the senior member of the group. So I have the opportunity kind of like after 40 years of experience, reflecting back on how my early upbringing, how my decision to go into planning, and really looking at my career, what I've done, and how I realized after all these years, how they're so intertwined from my early upbringing and values to what I chose to do and why I entered the planning field. So I thought I would kind of share more kind of my personal thoughts. I'll talk a little bit about some of the more recent projects I've done that I think reflects my interests and values. But I grew up in a segregated community, pretty much started not growing up initially in an all African American community, while Latinos, really low income area. My parents came from China, very poor. And that's kind of where I grew up for part of my life. And I didn't realize this is not that I'm that enlightened or anything, but I remember early in my days, I kind of saw the injustice, the racial prejudice that many of my friends experienced. You know, I grew up first in an African-American neighborhood and later near San Francisco, Chinatown. So I really, quite honestly, was not exposed to much of the Caucasian population until later on in my life. So in those early days, what's really embedded in me is I saw in my innocent eyes, I saw the injustice. I heard the racial slurs, not just against Asians, but particularly against African Americans. And I guess it kind of set in me that injustice. So as I go on in life, I realize that's been kind of a foundation of interest that's really driven me as I make choices in my life on what I do in the planning profession. How I got into planning was certainly I was very much interested in see how I'm planning, I was idealistic, I'll go into planning and I'll change cities and I'll change injustice, change the inequities. And we all go into planning with that type of ideal. I also had a very strong environmental bent in me. I remember in my early days, I read the book, Silent Spring by Rachel Carson. I don't know whether, and it kind of like just, really spurred to me. So social injustice, environmental issues, and then just my upbringing with my parents and the expectations. I think many of us, have immigrant parents that are really drive you to do a better life and contribute to the family, contribute to making a better place for all of us. So those kind of values kind of drove me to then think about, what do I want to do? Now, initially, I didn't know what planning was. Urban planning was just, I was just interested in environmental, social justice. So what's out there that really falls in that area? I didn't really know. I remember that when I'm in high school, I kind of mentioned this just this weekend, I didn't know what I wanted to do. So I went to high school counselor and they said, oh, here, take a career test. I'll tell you what you want to do. So I took this career test. And what came out first on the list, and probably because I'm very good in math, I'm kind of like one of those stereotypical Asians, good in math. And it was like, number one, be an accountant. And I thought to myself, that doesn't fit into kind of like what I want to do, though I could probably succeed. So that's the safe career. And then the second was surprisingly urban planning, or it was probably called city planning. And I said, what the heck is city planning? So the counselor quite honestly didn't know, but as I kind of I went to UC Berkeley and I majored in landscape architecture because that was the closest to environmental, but it didn't really touch on, to me, social justice. So then when I took an urban planning course at Berkeley, that's when it just kind of opened up my eyes. Planning, that is what I want to do. And it was in college was the awakening, and two kind of awakening. One is the interest in urban planning. And secondly, once I grew, when I moved out of San Francisco, I grew up in predominantly Caucasian. That's when my exposure to this kind of culture shock. I went from pretty much a, very diverse setting to almost an entirely Caucasian type of setting, where I was one of the few Asians. So growing up, I didn't realize how programmed you get into feeling that you're kind of ashamed of being Asian, or you don't want to acknowledge it. And it's just, that really, I think, subtle form of racism that kind of gets embedded in as you grow up. And so my second awakening was at Berkeley was I met a lot of Asians, that grew up in other Asian neighborhoods and have that kind of support. And it just kind of exposed me to that, we all have some common causes, in kind of furthering who we are. We're a minority that gets overlooked. We're kind of considered we struggle with being called the perfect minority. So at the same time, we're not treated equally either, in my opinion. So you kind of struggle with these image issues, but going to Berkeley and realizing, wow, there's other people like this that I haven't been able to share those kind of feelings, that have the exact same feelings that I do. So that kind of really opened up my eyes to the fact that, as Asians, I think we do not advocate for ourselves as much as we should. So I'm really proud that the APA has formed the Asian and Pacific Islander Interest Group. Hope everyone that's on this call joins, it's long overdue. And I feel guilty that this hasn't actually been created sooner, So, and I remember growing up, there was very little role models too. I think there's more role models now, even though I had mentors in planning. As far as Asian role models, you have to stretch for them, One of the things I feel really proud of is that one of my childhood kind of person I looked up to, Norman Mineta, who unfortunately passed away this year. Growing up in the Bay Area, he was very active in San Jose politics. And he was kind of a role model that I looked up to because I just lived in the adjacent community. And I felt so fortunate that I was able to interview him, probably his last interview before he passed away this year. It's almost, the honor of being able to kind of get involved and having him share the words with the API group. If you were able to attend the workshop earlier, he had some powerful words to say. So I encourage you, I didn't see it, to kind of look at the recording. And then I remember the other role model that came during the Watergate hearings. I don't know whether you guys, most of you probably weren't around then, since I'm kind of elderly. Daniel Inouye from Hawaii, the senator, he was on that committee. And I remember thinking, oh gosh, an Asian person in such a prominent political role, and he was a really impressive person. So looking for the role models, growing up, I realized how few and far between they are. So having us kind of serve that role, I see this new generation of really impressive, API planners and in other professions start to make some inroads, and that's really proud to say. So how has it affected what I do as a planner? When I look at my life, I kind of see that I've always gravitated working for diverse communities, that has a large mix of different populations. That's always attracted me. To me, community outreach have always been something I've always stressed in any projects I do. That's a strong value that I think goes back to my childhood, especially realizing there's a number of underrepresented communities or neighborhoods out there. And quite honestly, the outreach process in communities is very unbalanced. And so I've always had this interest in ensuring as much as I can to integrate and create a level playing field for all communities. Social equity issues have always been strong in whatever I've done. And AICP ethics, when I look at the ethics, I remember reading public interests. Serving the public interest has kind of been a forefront of a ethical principle that really is embedded in everything I think about in every project I do. So when I think about those values, I realize a lot of those kind of go back to my childhood. And I didn't realize that till later in my life, how connected what I've done is kind of rooted into my upbringing and background. You don't realize it until we reflect back on your life. Some of the more recent things I've done, now that I'm retired, I'm able to kind of pick what I do. And I'm very proud of some of the projects I've got involved in. On the Alameda Planning Board, one of the key things we really push for, and the planning board kind of served as kind of the general plan committee. We adopted a general plan that one of the 4 key elements was equity. It was right up there. It wasn't just an element, an EJ element or environmental justice element. It was integrated into all the policies. And in reviewing the general plan, I wanted to make sure transportation policies has the equity interest. Climate change very much has an equity social justice issue. Whether it's parks, transit, every aspect of land use planning or general plan has an equity element. So it's very much integrated into the general plan. And I'm really proud that has occurred, as well as a subsequent housing element. The city has that. For those in California, the challenge of getting housing element certified. And I'm so proud to say that city of Alameda housing element it's the first housing element certified in the Bay Area. Bay Area communities. So just that So the passion and the values that drive you as a planner are so important. Now, that may not be everything you do, but as you look down the vision, always look for those opportunities where that satisfaction can show up in whatever I do. Working right now, I'm doing a lot of work with East Palo Alto, which is a very strongly minority community with deep social justice and equity issues. I'm really motivated that I'm working on really non-planning things, but it has to do with like workforce development type of initiatives in the community, anti-displacement efforts, kind of rent arbitration, kind of tenant rights type of issues, really kind of doing work that I think represents the disadvantaged and underprivileged communities. So that's kind of a passion that now in older in my life, I can kind of pick and choose those things, right? When you're kind of going through mid-career level, you don't always get to work on everything that you have a passion in, even though generally I have a passion in planning, but working like on affordable housing projects or inclusionary housing programs, those are items that I'm really proud that I've had the opportunity in my planning career to get involved in. So that is, when I kind of think back on it again, I see so much of it kind of driven by the values of my early days growing up and what I observed and how that has translated to what I chose to do in my planning profession. And then later on, now that I can be more selective, the type of projects that I've taken on. But one of the things I would say throughout my whole career is that, with planning, you can easily get burnt out. We all work so hard. We're all working much harder than we ever had to do. But maintaining that passion, the vision of what you want to achieve, and if you have the ability to tackle what you have true passion in, whether it's furthering, dealing with social injustice or equity issues, or certainly I think us being more, as a group, being more focal about some of the Asian American issues that, quite honestly, I think in the last couple of decades have really been buried. We've been afraid to raise up and bring to the forefront of general discussion issues facing Asian Americans. And I think collectively, I see a lot more of that happening. And I think I'm very optimistic, despite the pessimism in this country and divisiveness that's occurring in some of the recent hate crimes and all of that. I'm still kind of very optimistic that, collectively, we're kind of speaking out more as a Asian Pacific Islander group, whether it's in the planning profession or any of the other professions that in society. I think our voices are being heard a lot stronger than they've been before. So that's really great to hear. So those are my comments. I hope I didn't take too much time, but I look forward to, entertaining questions from people that are attending this workshop.
Great, thank you, Hanson. And thank you to Joyce and Shannon and Joe as well for sharing their unique experiences and perspectives. Just looking at the time, it's 7:11, at least Central Time, so it's 11 past the hour. So we have about 19 minutes if we want to keep to a 90-minute session, but we can definitely go over if people have the time, but I do want to respect everyone's time as well. But we do have some questions in the chat. I'm just going to go in the order that they were submitted. So the first question was from Stephanie Yu. Stephanie's question was, or comment was, really appreciate Hanson's perspective and was hoping to hear similar stories from the other panelists too, wondering why each panelist chose the public sector and whether they think they will want to stay in public. I guess Hanson's mostly retired, so he will probably just stay retired and not go back into public, although you're consulting. But I'll throw that question out to the others in terms of why you chose public.
I can kick us off. I am probably the newest to the public sector out of everybody here. And honestly, I was never would have guessed. And I think that's part of my career journey is sort of like twists and turns. And I'm just always here for the ride, I guess. The mayor reached out last fall when he was elected, and I really had to think about it because coming from a nonprofit sector, I was involved in community development and economic development. I started to weigh the pros and cons of leaving a nonprofit life and moving into the public sector, knowing that it would just take a lot more intensity. And I think you're really kind of dealing with the political side of planning, at least on the city municipal level. And with a young family, as a young mom, I'm just like, I don't know if I can actually do this, just with the amount of responsibility there is. But to be honest, I just think that as I got into the role, and there was something that one of the staff members in the department said that just really stood with me. That is, the city and sort of public sector has a level of power that you can't, coming from the nonprofit advocacy world, and even on the community development side. Like the city actually owns the public realm and can regulate and can set the vision, and that government, if we're, if we have trust in the system, can do a lot of really great things. And I think that kind of moving from a more neighborhood level to a citywide level was probably the biggest struggle for me. That was extremely sobering to think about, serving the whole of the city and not just, 1 or 2 square miles. And I think that it really felt like a calling to me to use those terms, to say like, yes, this is in service to the people, and to be really mindful of the policies that we're making, because those policies impact people's day-to-day lives and also the generational aspect. So I think there's this balance of sort of like very much respect for the public sector. Because once I got in, I was like, oh wow, like this is like the work. And then also just like a respect for the ability to transform and make change that you have in the public sector. So.
Yeah, so I can follow that up. Joyce, mine probably just as a young planner, I think just in general, I'm not sure if I'll stay in the public sector. I love the public sector and all the work I've done it so far. But just
Hey Shannon, I think your audio is going in and out. Is everyone else experiencing that as well?
Okay, I'll let Joe go and try and figure out what's happening.
Sure. So I kind of fell into the public sector in a way. Hanson used the word ideal. And I think in my mind, I was really naive. I had this idea of what kind of impact could I have beyond the 4 walls. So leverage this interdisciplinary background that I had, and the idea of being a citizen architect. But really what that means is being an urban planner. So I likened it back to, Roman days, right? When architects did buildings and planned cities. And so I wanted to find out how could architects influence public policy, and found an internship, or received an internship from the White House. In correspondence of all things, totally misplaced there, but that led to connections at the General Services Administration. And to be honest, I didn't think I had the chops to be in private sector, to be an architect. That never really panned out for me early in my career to be an architect. Everything always like boomerangs back to being an urban planner, sort of just the natural fit for me. And yeah, it was, the light bulb didn't turn white hot until I got into practice. And they say, once you spend 3 years as a Fed, you become a lifer. So I will probably stay here in federal practice. But one thing that a professor did tell me, he said, if you want to have a real complete career, be a practitioner, be an educator, be a legislator. Explore your career, all avenues, private and public practice. And so that's what I did. So, but found public service became sort of this calling. I thought, that's when the light bulb went on to servant leadership and really how can you, what's the best way to make an impact on a community, on multiple communities. And so for me, it was at the federal level. And so, yeah, it was just kind of something I stumbled into.
Okay, I hope this works a little bit better. Yeah, actually, Joe, I think you said it great. Essentially, when I was looking at jobs and applying for internships, public sector was also something that just kind of lined up for me. It was an interest of mine before. I think just being in planning in general, we all kind of have some interest in being a public servant. So I think for myself, at least, of course, I'm looking to explore other opportunities. I also think that in general, that as a young planner, it could make me a better planner to see who we work with. I mean, we work with the private sector all the time and the nonprofit sector. So where can we fit in for that as public planners? Yeah.
One other thing I would add, the public sector, is very political. And that could be both good or bad. A lot of planners don't like the politics. And they can get frustrated, but I actually really enjoy the politics, not the bad side of politics, just the way how the sausage is made and just, it's not a perfect system. You get frustrated because we can't as planners, we can't implement our ideals, but just in the public sector, you get involved in that process, implementing, not just doing the plans, but really implementing the plans. To me, I always like to see the results. And as a public sector planner, you don't just do the plans. Once the consultants walk out the door, it falls on the public sector planners to really implement the plans and all the challenges there. To me, the success of a plan is not that it got adopted, it's how it got implemented, looking at it 20 years down the road. So that kind of drives me as being in the public sector.
Great. Thank you for those responses to the opening questions. We have about 10 minutes and looks like we have about 3 or 4 questions. I might do a lightning round. But the next question is, and I apologize if I mispronounced your name, Peng Cheng Fong asked, this is a general question for the panelists. I am curious on how you build solidarity/trust with other racially marginalized community members in your planning work, given that so often marginalized communities are pointed against each other in the current social climate.
I can kick us off. I think that I felt a lot of exhaustion because I think that, to Hanson's point, we must advocate for our own communities, right? Our Asian American communities, but we also advocate for those that are marginalized. And, that's the cost of white supremacy in all of us, is that we bear the burden of needing to lift each other up. And so I think for me, building trust really means that that we have to speak up even at risk of our own, if there's a consequence of speaking up, right? Like specifically because we work with majority Black populations, I think everyone's sort of like, don't know what to make of you. And kind of really want to test and see if you're really on the side of like justice, or are you here just to like advance yourself, right? And so I think that speaking up and letting your actions follow your words, and showing that you're on the side of justice is probably the first step. And honestly, I think that because many of us have experienced what it's like to be marginalized, we know what we want with regard to like outreach or just to be heard. And so I feel that like the most impactful and effective times have been like when I've actually been able to sit down one-on-one to build trust and build a relationship with people who are of another racial group, but have are oppressed. And I think that I think we have to be mindful too that I think coming into everything, even after college, I was sort of like, oh yeah, we all experience levels of oppression, but really, I think have really dug into the Black experience over the past few years, and it's like a lot to unpack now, but on this call, but I think that there's like a lot of layers there, I think, between Asian Americans and the Black community that we do need to continue to unpack. And it's quite complicated, I think. So I think that's where I've seen some success, but I think coming into this role, we're not, you know, I was able to do that on a grassroots level in the neighborhoods, but citywide, and now also being seen in sort of an administration's perspective, right? Like the city, I think it's going to be even more critical to be speaking up for justice. So.
I'll just add, that's really an excellent question. It's really not an easy answer, as Joyce mentioned. It's really a complex question. You know, there's a certain time when you talk to certain communities, you know, of another racial composition, you know, you talk honestly, and they either, oh, okay, you do get it, you understand us, you know, or, you know, to some degree, can't claim you fully understand, but you get a sense of connection, and I've sensed that, and I think a lot of it is because you understand, coming from a common ground. But the other hand, you know, I also get the opposite, where they just see you as white. You know, you're just part of the white. You know, you look different, but you're basically part of the white culture. You know, you're just speaking for them, even though you look differently. So I get that too. So it's a real struggle, you know, on how you bridge that gap. And sometimes you're successful, sometimes you're not. But that's a great question.
Todd, I don't think I have anything more to add to Joyce or Hanson. They both sort of have the mic drop on this one, but I'll, in the interest of time, yield my time to Shannon and get to the other questions that people have.
Sure. Shannon, did you have anything to add?
No, I think that Hanson and Joyce did great. Very well said.
Okay. I think our next question from Joyce has, I think, may have been answered, but I'll just throw it out there just in case anyone wanted to add anything else. So Joyce asked, appreciate all of the panelists and moderators too, wondering how our panelists navigate between their work as planners and their own racial identities. Example from Hanson about community engagement being central, or others about growing up in predominantly white communities can have deep impacts on us. And some of your responses from the previous question I think it touched upon that, but I just wanted to make sure I recognized Joyce's question. We can get back to that one as well. We have.
Well, I was just going to
go,
ask,
Hanson.
Like, and this is an honest assessment. One of the things I realized is that it's less so now, but in my early days, you know, it was hard to acknowledge that you're Asian, you know, in the workplace. I mean, it's almost like everyone saw that you were Asian, but you didn't really talk about it with other employees that were non-Asian. You talked about it with other Asians, but you didn't talk about it with non-Asians. So in a way, I feel like, geez, I lost an opportunity to really talk and speak, but then at the same time, I sometimes how receptive with some of the things I would say 20 years ago would be understood today. I think they're much more understood today, could be more focal, but I'm not sure some of the things we're talking about today would have been receptive 20, 30 years ago.
Yeah, thank you, Hanson. I appreciate that view. Yeah, growing up in the 90s, it was like not a cool thing to be Asian, like, and honestly, we're really ignored. I think that I appreciate the way you shared this, Joyce, that growing up in predominantly white communities can have deep impacts on us. I did grow up in a predominantly white community. It was 95% white, in a suburb right outside Rochester, New York. And I'm still unpacking to this day, like all that impact that had on my social formation. And I think similar to Hanson, when I went to college and was completely immersed in Asian American community, that's when I felt like I kind of got my voice and I could grasp my leadership and kind of could put language to the ways that I grew up differently. And so kind of going through Asian American studies or, other kind of cultural competency type courses, you're like, oh, okay, like I can actually put words to this now, but I still think that I want to kind of reclaim my Asianness in ways that aren't like cheesy, but like, what do we bring to the table that is different, right? And what is our leadership style and how is that different? And honestly, just trying to like get my Asian brain back sometimes because I've been immersed in so much, with white supervisors or white leaders for so long. Although now my boss is a Black leader. So I'm like, all right, let's do this. But like, I think that there's a lot that I'm always wrestling with of, I don't want to lose parts of myself, even though I've like being profoundly shaped through growing up to think in a certain way.
Yeah, just to add on, I think this is something that I'm also still kind of molding myself into my racial identity. And it sounds like from Hanson and Joyce, and I'm sure Joe as well, that it's something that is lifelong work. And especially something that I didn't really recognize in myself until I graduated college, undergrad 3-4 years ago. So it's only been since I moved to Washington, D.C. and started grad school that I've really started embracing my Japanese culture, which is also kind of interesting because my dad also grew up in Hawaii and my grandparents have been in Hawaii since my family has just pretty long roots there. So it was kind of interesting being Japanese, but my cultural ties weren't as much to Japan. So I think growing up in like a predominantly white neighborhood outside of Central Florida, it was kind of an interesting thing. Like most people that were Asian had immigrant parents, and it was something that I also felt like I couldn't always connect to. So that's something I'm still navigating, and especially in work, I think I'm lucky enough to be starting my career right now, rather than in the 90s or early 2000s or before that, where these conversations are things that I can have with my employers and with my coworkers. And I think that makes kind of a unique circumstance compared to everyone else. But yeah, I think my answer pretty much is I'm still figuring that out and navigating it. But I'm excited to see the progress in these conversations in the workplace.
Shannon, I really appreciate your honest answer there. And I think you're right. It is lifelong work. And I think the way Joyce and Hanson have described it shows sort of this level of self-awareness that I think is kind of inspiring. So thank you both. And Shannon, I think thank you too for, just acknowledging that I think everybody has sort of their own path and figuring it out. And, it's something I'm still working at as well. So, I don't know, change happens at the speed of trust. So it takes time. And someone once said, sometimes things take a while to ripen. And I think that moment for all of us is, it's there now. It just, as Shannon mentioned, Hanson described and Joyce confirmed, right? In the 90s and earlier, it just wasn't the right space. So now we all have that space to kind of figure it out on our own. But we all sort of share that same story, that same thread.
Great. Thank you all for sharing your responses and your questions. I wish we had more time. It actually really jump-started something in my mind, is that maybe we need like an open forum where we can just talk to each other. Maybe it's like part 5 of this kind of 4-part series or part 1A. So that's something we'll noodle around as a group and figure out. Maybe we do need like an open forum where we can all just share our stories. It doesn't have to have a panel attached to it. Maybe it's just like a 90 minutes or 60 minutes of just chatting with each other and sharing stories. But I do want to respect everyone's time. We are at 32 past the hour. We started 2 minutes after, a little bit later, so we are about at 90 minutes. But definitely keep an eye on your inbox for parts 2, 3, and 4. You actually see on the splash screen I have in front of you at the lower left corner of the graphic, our forthcoming sessions. Part 2 is the private sector, which will most likely be in January. So in a few months, but it's fast approaching too. So not too far out in the distant future. And part 3 will be academia, most likely in February or March. And then part 4 will be the nonprofit sector in April or May. We do recognize that the National Planning Conference is in early April, so that part 4 will probably be in late April or early May, just to respect the national conference. But yeah, thank you for sticking around and for sharing your time with us. I did want to say that if you do want to share this, we are recording this. If you want to share it with any colleagues, if you look earlier in the chat, I put a link of where all our YouTube videos are. So eventually we'll post this one as well. And then Hing posted that this is available for 1.5 CM credits. And he put the program number in there. So if you are looking to add to your CM credit log, that is also in the chat. So I will keep this open for a little bit. So if people want to kind of look in the chat, they can. But thank you for your time, and we'll see you hopefully for part 2.